Fellas, last night was UFC 309, Jones versus Miocic. A lot of things to talk about after that card and a lot of matchmaking that we got to do. We're going to be matchmaking every fighter after UFC 309. We're going to start off with the winner of every prelim fight, matchmaking those guys, and then we'll get into the main card where we matchmake every single fighter on the main card. I'll put timestamps in the description if you want to go to a specific fight or if you want to go to the main card or whatever. We'll start off with the first win, which was Eduardo Mora beating Veronica Hardy. I think she should fight Tracy Cortez. She's probably made it into the rankings again. Veronica Hardy, I said the entire fight week, is probably the best unranked women's flyweight out there. Eduardo Mora went out there and beat her in a fairly competitive fight. She's 2-1 in the UFC so far. Tracy Cortez hasn't looked that good in her past couple of fights, especially her most recent one to Rose Namajunas. I actually think she might be one of the worst ranked women's flyweights out there. I don't really know what she's looking to do for the rest of her career, so I think we'll give Mora a ranking shot, give her against Tracy Cortez. I think from a stylistic point of view, it's quite a good fight as well. Both of these guys are really good wrestlers, obviously. Mora, I mean, she was able to take down and control Veronica Hardy. She trains at the same gym from Almeida. Tracy Cortez is known for good wrestling. I think we see these guys against each other, and we give Eduardo Mora a ranking spot. Auburn Elliott, I want to see him versus somebody like Alex Morono next. He's 3-0 in the UFC. I don't really want to call him a prospect just yet, but he's 3-0 in the UFC, 3 good wins, but it's not against the highest level opponents. Like, he beat Val Woodburn, he beat Preston Parsons, and he beat Basil Hafez, who's, I think, 1-1 in the UFC. I don't know, I think, yeah, he's 1-2 in the UFC now. So he still needs to get like a good win, and I think Alex Morono would be that seasoned veteran for Auburn Elite to get that win against. Morono's not bad, but he's not an elite fighter either. He's kind of like that good fighter to test your new prospects on. Recently coming off that really close loss to Daniel Rodriguez. He's a good grappler with boxing that he kind of stays active with. It's a tough fight for Auburn Elliott, the toughest fight of his career so far. From a stylistic point of view, it's going to be quite difficult because Morono's not too bad on the feet and he has got really good jiu-jitsu. But I think if Auburn Elliott can get past Alex Morono, from there we can start maybe talking about him getting close to the rankings and maybe even getting a ranked opportunity if he can beat Alex Morono in impressive fashion. So I think we test him with his toughest fight yet, a veteran in Alex Morono, to kind of see how good he is, rather than just keep giving him these kind of, I don't want to call Basil Hafez a can, but these guys who shouldn't really be talked about in the conversation of the highest level of the UFC. Then we had Brahim Hodge go out there and knock out Mickey Gall. I think him versus Trevin Giles should make a bit of sense. Trevin Giles, I think he's on a 3-fight losing streak, recently lost to Mark Mallet. He's kind of fighting to save his contract in the UFC, and so was Brahim Hodge at the time of fighting Mickey Gall. Knocks out Mickey Gall. I think we do Brahim Hodge versus Trevin Giles. Not really too much input on that fight. Marcin Tybura got a win over Denise. Now, obviously, Denise was unranked, so it's not like Tybura takes anybody's ranking spot or he should move in the rankings, but he got a good finish over Denise. I think we do Marcin Tybura versus Derek Lewis number 2. Derek Lewis has knocked out Marcin Tybura before. Since that fight, I've always said Marcin Tybura, he's what, like, you look at the guys that he's been losing to recently. It's been Aspinall, Volkov, and Spivak. All these guys are top heavyweights. I mean, one of them's the best in the world. Derek Lewis was supposed to fight Denise. It fell short. It's coming off that knockout win over Rodrigo Nascimento. I think we see these guys maybe in a fight night main event next year. And I think the winner of this fight can get quite a big fight in the heavyweight division. Like, if Marcin Tybura can beat Derek Lewis, honestly, it might seem like a big step up, but I wouldn't even mind seeing Tybura versus somebody like Curtis Blades if he can get past Derek Lewis, because there's not really any big names for Blades right now. And if Derek Lewis can knock out Marcin Tybura, that gets him bigger fights in the division as well. So Marcin Tybura versus Derek Lewis number 2. Tougher test for both of these guys. Leaning towards Tybura, but I could definitely see Lewis chinning him. I think we do the rematch in a fight night main event next year. David Onama got a really good fight against, what's his name? Romero, I think his name was. I forgot his name. It was a short notice fight. I think it was Romero anyway. Really good fight. He was in the 155 division. I don't know if he's staying at 155 or if he's moving down to 145, but I'd like to see him fight Cub Swanson next. Again, this is a good fight to test how good David Onama is. Facing him against a very dangerous boxer in Cub Swanson. He's on a 3-fight winning streak now. He's David Onama. He's getting close to that ranking spot now, so give him somebody like Cub Swanson, who's a veteran and who is very dangerous, and if he can pass the test against Cub Swanson, maybe then we start seeing him against the likes of either the better unranked fighters like maybe Anderson Brito and William Gomez or Nathaniel Wood, or maybe even just give him a ranking opportunity against one of the ranked featherweights out there. So David Onama, Cub Swanson, good fight to test David Onama. Jim Miller got a finish. Now, I'm glad that I'm not having to sit here and say that Jim Miller should retire. I've said he's not washed. Jim Miller isn't washed. You know, he's still got the skills. Obviously, he's out of his prime, but he ain't washed. I want to see him versus Jared Gordon. Yeah, Jim Miller, he's not able to fight, really, in my opinion, close to the rankings. I mean, he showed it when he fought Bobby Green and got an opportunity to fight a ranked fighter. The top 15 is a no-go, in my opinion, for Jim Miller. Even the likes of, you know, Yoel Alvarez and Rembetsky should be kind of signed off. I think we'll just give him a couple of fun fights. I think Jared Gordon could be a good fight. Jared Gordon's been in the UFC for a while. He's had a couple of fights against top lightweights. I mean, he fought Paddy Pimblett, obviously had a very close loss to him. Then he had that no contest to Bobby Green, coming off a robbery loss to Nasrat Haqparast as well. I think we do Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. I think this can be quite a competitive fight. I probably favour Jared Gordon because I think he's the better boxer. He uses pressure offensively and he's not got the worst defense. But Jim Miller's been finished everyone left, right and centre. The last time Jim Miller had a win and it wasn't by way of finish was, I think, back in 2017. So Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. They were scheduled to fight last year. Let's do it again. Put it on like some sort of pay-per-view. Two guys that I think could put up a competitive fight. So Jim Miller, Jared Gordon. And then for the final prelim before we go on to the main card, Marcus McGee. I think we do him versus Eamon Zahabi. Now, the problem is, obviously, he's not going to be fighting up now that he takes Jonathan Martinez's ranking place. He's going to be in the rankings, but there's not really any major bantamweights he can fight unless we do him versus Jose Aldo, which I don't really think people want to see. There's not really any major names for him to fight. I think Eamon Zahabi could be a good test. Eamon Zahabi recently won at UFC Canada in a really impressive fashion. He's now in the top 15 of the bantamweight division. And I think we'll just see these guys face each other. And I think the winner of this fight can maybe then go and fight somebody like Song Yudong or Marlon Vera. So it's kind of like two up-and-comers in the bantamweight division going against each other. It's almost as if we would have seen Mario Batista versus Jonathan Martinez or something like that. So Marcus McGee, Eamon Zahabi, put it on like a fight night main card, or maybe the prelim headliner again for a pay-per-view. Winner gets a big fight in the bantamweight division. I think those guys should face each other, and I think it'll be a really good fight. Zahabi's kind of turned up now that he's got a really good team with him. His striking has improved tenfold, and Marcus McGee is probably one of the most exciting prospects right now in the bantamweight division. Powerful, dangerous, well-rounded, and technical. He's got everything going for him. So I think we've seen versus Zahabi. And then for the main card, James Lontop. Now, I was 99% sure I was going to come in today and tell you that he's going to be cut from the UFC because he would have been on a free fight only, but it would have been 0-3 in the UFC. But after that performance against one of the lightweight's biggest prospects, you kind of feel bad cutting him from the UFC. I think we give him one more opportunity against Balaji Oki. Balaji Oki recently fought on UFC Paris. I believe that might have been his first fight in the UFC when he fought Chris Duncan and got finished. Both of these guys are in a similar position where they've probably got to fight one more fight and they get cut from the UFC. That's if Lontop doesn't get cut. So they're kind of two low-level lightweights, but I think they should compete for the opportunity to stay in the UFC. Loser gets cut from the UFC, winner gets to stay in the UFC. So yeah, James Lontop, give him a low-level lightweight just to see how he does. And I think Balaji Oki, who was once a big prospect and a favourite going into that fight with Chris Duncan, should fight James Lontop. And then for the winner, Mauricio Hufi called out Benoit Saint-Denis. I don't think Benoit Saint-Denis should be next. That's a big step. We got to remember, this dude's 2-0 in the UFC, one of them being a decision to James Lontop. I think fighting a ranked fighter would be a massive step up in competition, and there's no need to rush him. I think we see Mauricio Hufi against somebody that can really give him a test. Mauricio Hufi versus Elvis Brenner. These guys are really tough, and I think this would be an absolute banger. Elvis Brenner trains at Charles Oliveira's gym. Very powerful on the feet, very hard-hitting, really good jiu-jitsu. He would be a really big threat for Mauricio Hufi, especially after how he looked against James Lontop as well. He's had some wars with the likes of Mitabek Orobai, recently coming off that loss to Yoel Alvarez. I think Mauricio Hufi versus Elvis Brenner, maybe do it in like a UFC Brazil card next year because they're both Brazilian. I think this will be an absolute banger. Either Elvis Brenner can kind of be the guy to beat Mauricio Hufi and get a massive win, or Mauricio Hufi can beat Elvis Brenner, and if he can beat Elvis Brenner, the UFC being generous, they might even give him an opportunity at the rankings, or at least they might give him one of the better unranked lightweights like a Bobby Green or a Grant Dawson or a Yoel Alvarez or a Perez Ziam, somebody like that. So Mauricio Hufi, let's test him, let's give him Elvis Brenner. I think this will be an absolute banger as well, considering they're always in fun fights. Karine Silva, I'm not going to spend too long on women MMA. Karine Silva looked absolutely terrible. Let's see her versus Casey O'Neill. Casey O'Neill is barely scraping the flyweight ranking. She's number 15 in the division. Yeah, let's do Karine Silva versus Casey O'Neill. She needs to fight down. And for Araujo, coming off a good win, I guess we see her versus Rose Namajunas next. Namajunas has not been looking great recently. She just recently lost a 5-round main event to Erin Blanksfield. She's been smoked by Fiorot. She needs to stay away from the title picture. Araujo's coming off a good win over Karine Silva as an underdog. Let's see Araujo get a shot against Rose Namajunas. Put it on like a main card of a fight night, hopefully not the co-main event, or just stick it on the prelims of a pay-per-view. Rose Namajunas versus Araujo, I think that could be a good fight. And then for the featured fight, Paul Craig. I don't want to say cut him from the UFC, and he's not like he's, extremely washed or anything like that, but how many has he lost now? Has he lost 5 out of his last 6, with his only win being over Andre Muniz? He needs to stay away from these prospects. He needs to stay away from these top middleweights because, unfortunately, he just doesn't have the talent to compete. I think we're seeing versus Nordiev. Nordiev recently competed at UFC 308, and he got a good win over Bruno Silva, and he's come back to the UFC. He didn't look too bad in that fight. Didn't look overly impressive. Considering he's now he's not 1-0 in the UFC, but he's 1-0 since his comeback. I think we see Nordiev versus Paul Craig. Nordiev's active on the feet. He's a good grappler. I think this is a much easier fight for Paul Craig than a guy like Bo Nickel. But I think Paul Craig definitely has not an advantage, but he has a chance on the feet and obviously the jiu-jitsu as well. So Nordiev's going to want to fight up. Craig needs to fight down. Let's see Paul Craig versus Nordiev. And for Bo Nickel, he's probably going to... I think he is going to get a ranked fight, okay? He's, what, like 4-0 in the UFC now, a couple of finishes. He's probably the middleweight's biggest prospect, undefeated. He's probably going to get a shot at the rankings. Now, if we look at the middleweight division, I think a fight that would really test Bo Nickel, but could also have big implications if he wins, would be Jack Hermansson. This would be a really good fight, because Jack Hermansson... he's kind of a stylistic nightmare for Bo Nickel. I mean, Jack Hermansson's already fraud-checked Joe Pyfer when Joe Pyfer came in the middleweight division. Maybe he can be like the Neil Magny of the welterweight division of fraud-check Bo Nickel as well. He's got really good grappling, does Jack Hermansson. He always used to have this exciting jiu-jitsu, then he kind of fell off, but he's recently coming off a win over Joe Pyfer where he outstruck Joe Pyfer. I think on the feet, Jack Hermansson definitely outstrikes Bo Nickel. I think Bo Nickel's got to be careful if he does take the fight to the mat, and if he can take the fight to the mat with Jack Hermansson. I know Jack Hermansson would be fighting down, but he's been super inactive. I mean, he was inactive before the Joe Pyfer fight. He beats Pyfer by decision, and now he's been inactive again. He hasn't fought since February. So, Bo Nickel versus Jack Hermansson, potential fight night main event in the Apex. Big opportunity for Bo Nickel, because if he can beat a bad matchup in Jack Hermansson, he's going to be in the top 10 of the middleweight division. And if Jack Hermansson can fraud check Bo Nickel, it's a massive win. Two grapplers going at it, a chance for Bo Nickel to fight a ranked fighter. That's what I think should be next for Bo Nickel. And then for Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler's still a top lightweight. Like, even though he's never going to fight for a belt, and I'm not saying he's going to win, he is undoubtedly a top lightweight. Like, even when he's losing, he's having close performances. I mean, he nearly finished Oliveira in that 5th round. I'd love to see Chandler versus Max Holloway for the BMF belt. He called him out in his post-fight octagon interview. I've been saying I like this fight ever since Holloway lost to Ilia Topuria. Michael Chandler versus Max Holloway. What a banger this would be. You've got Max Holloway, who's still one of the best boxers in the UFC, only been shinned once by Ilia Topuria, one of the best strikers in the UFC, and he absolutely dominated Gaethje at 300, taking on Michael Chandler, who, even though he loses most of his fights, makes them extremely competitive and close. Absolute powerhouse, can mix it up with a grappling, nearly finished Oliveira in that 5th round, so his conditioning's good. Michael Chandler versus Max Holloway. This is like a Michael Chandler versus Gaethje or a Poirier or one of those guys. You know what you're going to expect. You know it's going to be bloody. You know it's going to be a fun fight. You know it probably doesn't go the distance. Michael Chandler versus Max Holloway for the BMF belt in the lightweight division. Now that Holloway's settling down to the 155 division, I think will be a great fight for both of them. So, Chandler versus Holloway. And then for Oliveira, it's got to be a title shot against the winner of Makhachev and Sarukian. I personally think Makhachev's going to win. But yeah, I think it's got to be a title shot. Even though he has only had one win since his most recent loss to Sarukian, first things first, it was a very, very close fight to Alma Sarukian. Some people even thought he won. And now that he's gone out there and dominated Michael Chandler for 4 rounds straight, nearly got finished in the 5th, but still dominated him, I think we give him a title shot. And Oliveira looked evolved. His wrestling looked improved. So let's run it back with Makhachev. I still think Makhachev beats Oliveira and finishes him, but you've got to give him a title shot after that performance. Give him Islam Makhachev. And if Sarukian can win, then it's a competitive rematch between Charles Oliveira and Ahmed Sarukian. And even though I would pick Makhachev to beat Oliveira at this moment in time, you can't really count Oliveira out. Like, the dude's got striking. The dude's got apparently wrestling after that performance. Obviously, he's got great jiu-jitsu as well. I'm kind of excited for the rematch, a lot more than I were when it originally was scheduled after Oliveira just took the beating from Makhachev. So Makhachev versus Oliveira 2 for the belt, or obviously Sarukian if he wins. I think should be next for Charles Oliveira, getting back in the title picture. Stipe should not be fighting anybody. I'm pretty sure he retired, which was the good choice, because nobody wants to see Stipe, in my opinion, compete in 2024. Like, the dude was not fit to be fighting for a belt. 42 years old, coming off a knockout loss, been out for 4 years, looked horrible. So I'm glad that he retired. It was the good option. I wish they would have done a little bit more for his retirement. Like, they gave Carla Esparza a whole retirement ceremony, and they gave Stipe Miocic absolutely nothing. I thought that was kind of disrespectful, but yeah, greatest heavyweight of all time to retire. And for Jones, there's only one name. It's got to be Tom Aspinall. I'm so disappointed in Jones in that post-fight octagon interview. He had the opportunity to call out Aspinall when Aspinall was in the building, and it seems like the UFC are just trying to completely erase Aspinall. They don't let him at the press conference. They don't let him at the weigh-ins. They don't even let him step in the octagon after the fight. was kind of frustrating to see, but it's got to be Aspinall. Everyone's been saying this leading up to the fight. Jones goes out there and dominates Miocic, and guess what? We're going to be seeing it after the fight as well, because he hasn't beaten the interim champion, Tom Aspinall, who is by far Jon Jones' biggest test in his entire UFC career, at least in the heavyweight division. Aspinall, in my opinion, is the best heavyweight in the world. Jon Jones is holding on to that belt. He's come off two not two first-round finishes, but two finishes in the heavyweight division. It's got to be the fight. I think it's the biggest fight you can make in the UFC heavyweight division right now. I'd go as far to say I think this would be the biggest fight the UFC have ever seen in heavyweight history. This would be huge. I'm hoping the UFC are going to make this matchup. Jones said that he's going to stick around and have a couple of big fights if the money's right. And I think Dana White and Hunter are kind of saying that, listen, you ain't fighting Porton no matter what. If you do, you're vacating your belt. It's got to be Aspinall next. The only issue I've got with this fight is how long is Jones going to be out for? Because Aspinall hasn't fought since July. And he can't really fight again because he's the interim champion and he's not going to defend it again. So it really depends on how long Jones takes. If Jones doesn't fight until like October, August next year, Aspinall's going to be out for over a year, and I don't want to see Aspinall waste an entire year just waiting for Jon Jones. So yeah, Jones versus Aspinall, the best versus the best in the heavyweight division, one of the most exciting fights you can make in the UFC. Either the greatest of all time gets it done, or Tom Aspinall takes out the trash and beats Jon Jones. But that would be me matchmaking every fighter after UFC 309. Let me know your thoughts on these matchups and 309 as a whole. Thank you for watching.